Okay, everybody call the meeting to order and hopefully the mayor can get online soon and Jim may be stuck in traffic with the way things are. So I'll call the meeting to order at 5:34 and can I have a move or actually Councilor Dave Burgess then move the motion to adopt the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. Moved by myself that the agenda of the committee of the whole meeting for the 11th of June 2024 be adopted as presented.
Discussion on the motion. All in favor of the motion? Carried unanimously. Mayor Brown, are you online?
Okay, and it should be there now.
You're on mute, Judy.
You can hear me?
You'll have to take your phone off mute, Judy.
Oh, I've clicked on mute and I've clicked on video and they're both showing that they're connecting.
I can hear the mayor.
I can
Good.
hear her too.
Okay, but you can't see me?
I can see you.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see you too.
Either chair.
Gary, can you say a couple of words?
Sorry, was that directed to me?
Yes.
All right. Want to make a statement?
You're breaking up, Deputy Mayor.
Well, anybody has disclosure of interest now or anytime during the meeting, just please let us know. Public meetings under the planning act, there is an unscheduled adoption is not scheduled and works, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Earlier this year, I was before you presenting the issues and options report as the conclusion of phase one of the efficient plan update project that we've been happy to assist you with. One of the key elements of the recommendations of that report was to undertake a new comprehensive review, which is essentially determining the need for identifying additional commercial, industrial, or residential lands. And council agreed to that process, and I felt that it was important to get this work before you early in the phase two project. And I'll be honest with you, I believe it would be somewhat germane to the current OMB exercise associated with the golf course. The work that you have before you is more of a critique of your 2018 comprehensive review. As I was getting into the work, I felt that that project was, I think, fairly well done. I did have a wee bit of a hand in it. And I think that it clearly identified that the town had the capacity and the ability to grow. And in 2018, we were allocated population by the county of Lanark of 8,085 people. We had just expanded the lagoon infrastructure to take us to about 8,100 people. And it was sort of a new era of growth potential for the town of Perth. And so I felt that it was perhaps more appropriate to critique that exercise and see how far we have changed since 2018. And I will be very honest with you, I didn't originally anticipate that we had traveled as far as we have in terms of the social context within what we're living in today in 2024. I think one of the important things to realize is that we added a little over 11 hectares of new residential lands. Part of them were the Tayview lands. They had only partially been designated residential in 2018, and following official plan amendment 16, all of the Tayview lands were added into residential. The Brownlee lands north of 7, we were able to pick up about 60% of that as being residential. And then the balance consisted of infill intensification and existing vacant residential lands. At that time, there wasn't population allocation, there wasn't justification to identify or to designate all of the vacant greenfield lands that had been annexed into Perth to be designated residential. And that meant that there was a portion of the Brownlee lands that were left in a future development designation, and all but 120 units worth of land at the golf course were left in a special policy area. The golf course lands in particular were identified as expensive to develop because of the need from a public health and safety standpoint for an additional access, which meant a bridge over the Tay. As well, there were challenges through the environmental assessment process coming up with a stormwater management solution that was acceptable to the Conservation Authority. All of which meant that there were some lands that weren't going to be designated. So we simply designated the lands that could be easily or more easy to develop than others. And as a result, some of the Brownlee and some of the golf course lands did not advance at that time. In the end of the day, we had about 20% of the growth projected to be accommodated through infill and intensification. The wee bits of land that are scattered throughout the community that historically Perth has made efforts to get higher density on through pre-zoning. And we were looking at roughly 58, 60 new residential units a year. And that was going to take us to the year 2038, which was the timeline under the Planning Act, the provincial policy statement to accommodate growth, and that's the planning window, and that was going to take us to 8,500. I think, or 8,085. I think at the time, many of us felt that that was very optimistic. Perth had stayed 6,000 people for 4 decades, if not more. And the idea of Perth growing to over 8,000, I think was a huge leap for a lot of us. And myself included, felt that I was going to look after Perth for a long. One of the things that I've tried to do in the report is there's 2 components that I think are important for council to be able to wrap your head around. One is the change in the provincial policy statements since 2018. In other words, the overriding provincial policy that all municipalities must adhere to. And the other is how many things have changed in society to make us look at growth and development differently than what we did in 2018. And as an old planner, that journey was a challenge for me. And the conclusion of the report was not necessarily the conclusion I thought I was going to be running. And the report took on a life of itself, and hopefully you'll indulge me as I go through some of the changes. I think the first thing to keep in mind is the provincial policy statement. In 2018, we were working with the then 2014 PPS. And that 2014 PPS was a significant shift in the way people were thinking about development at the time. There was much more emphasis on infill and intensification. If you were going to identify new lands for development, you had to have population allocated to you from the upper tier, and you couldn't go beyond that allocation. And that meant that the population allocation was thought of as a hard cap. That's as far as you can go. That's as much as you've been allocated. You can't have any more lands for development than that. And the concept was, if you keep the urban boundary tight, there will be more pressure and demand for infill and intensification and less sprawl. And that was the overriding theme of the 2014 PPS. We now have today a 2020 PPS that adopted all of that sort of planning concept from the 2014. The 2014 and the 2020 both speak about the need for comprehensive reviews, both speak about the need for allocation of population, and both speak that only municipalities can expand their boundary through comprehensive reviews at the time of official plan updates. What's changed is that over the last 2 years, we have had two versions of a new PPS. And then today it's referred to as the 2024 PPS. And it has softened that approach. It no longer uses the language of comprehensive review. It still says you need to have population projections that are supportive. It still says you need to have the ability to service it and have servicing capacity, and that you're not going to agricultural lands and a few other things. But it's not as prescribed that thou shalt not grow, and it dropped the concept of comprehensive review, though the elements of a comprehensive review are still seen in the policy. I want to stress that the 2024 PPS is not in effect. When the government rose last Thursday, they passed a flurry of legislation, including Bill 185, which means there's no more third-party appeals for official plan amendments or zoning amendments or any other planning application in the province of Ontario. But they did not adopt the 2024 PPS. They're not going to be sitting again until October. It's unclear whether they will be moving on that PPS until the fall, the third or fourth quarter. It is, however, clear from a number of our sources that we try to stay in contact with that the spirit of the 2024 PPS with respect to growth is a new way of thinking, and it is very, very consistent with the provincial government and federal government's responses to the housing crisis. I think that when you start thinking about the change in social context, those PPS versions, the 14, the 20, and the pending 2024, are all reflective of how we've evolved in Ontario and how our thinking is to be different than it was in 2018 when we did our first comprehensive review. I think COVID taught us that we're attractive as communities for places for people to move to and live and grow. And we saw a huge surge into what I affectionately call the hinterland out of urban areas during COVID for lifestyle responses. Now, some have moved back because they found out that we didn't have Uber and that we didn't have public transit and that there were other aspects of sort of rural living that maybe challenged some of their urban sensibility. But I think there has been a lot of people that have rediscovered the joy of living in small town rural communities. That combined with a new sort of emphasis on remote work or not needing to be in the office every day means a community like Perth that's an hour from downtown Ottawa or an hour from downtown Kingston is a place people can live and maybe go into the city once or twice a week. And that's much more tolerable than having to do that daily commute. And so COVID, remote work, PPS, those are big changes in how society is organized and works. The other thing that we found is that in the 2021 census for the town of Perth, the town actually got very close to 6,500 persons population. That is almost 600 people increase in a census period, which is significant for any small town community. But for a community such as Perth that has been very sort of stuck in the 5,900, 6,000 for decades, it's huge to have that kind of surge in population. And there's no indication that that has changed, that we continue to attract new people to the community. And of course, everybody is very much aware around this table of the change in the housing crisis has brought, whether it's new federal policies, exemptions for taxation for certain purpose-built rentals. We are inundated with the need to build more houses, to house our population, and to allow the next generation of homeowners some hope that that actually can happen for them. You know, I'm not alone with having two young daughters under 30 that are going, Daddy, we don't know if we're ever going to have a house, right? And that's not something that any of us experience, right? And that, I think, is something that's very unfortunate about our current state of affairs. And we are being told we have to be more accommodating development. We have to be more assertive in making sure development happens. And as an approval authority, we have an important responsibility to make sure that houses get built. And we provide a climate where that investment can happen. One of the other things that I think is significant is that when we were doing the work in 2017 and 2018 for projecting the future growth of the community, the golf course was owned by the three entrepreneurs that had owned it for a number of years. It was widely known that it was on the market. There had been various visions of how it could be redeveloped for residential purposes, but it wasn't in the hands of a developer like the brown ones or the purple ones. And I think that it's fair to say that when you've got somebody owning land and it's their business to build houses, you're going to be approached differently than if it's more aspirational from a landowner standpoint. And so I think the fact that the golf course is now owned by a known developer in the Eastern Ontario context changes the way you would look at that. And then the final component that I think is critical is that Leonard County has undergone a new growth study, a new population projection. They hired the one firm that I would do that, and that's Watson Associates. They're one of the best in the business, in my opinion. And they've come up with a projection that takes Leonard County to the year 2051. They projected the town of Perth at 2051, which is 25, 30 years out, at 1,500. It just so happens that with a planned expansion of the Sagar system at the lagoon, our population could be serviced at 10,500. The PPS is very clear that it says we have to have existing sanitary capacity or planned sanitary capacity. We have existing to take us to 8,100. We have planned capacity with the addition of one cell at a relatively modest investment to take us to 10,500. So we've got one component that's one of the most critical components is the ability to service. There is no concern with your water system. You have the ability and the license to provide water services in addition to the 10,500. You have the second component that's required, which is a new population projection. Granted, it's not been sanctioned and approved by county council. It's not part of the county official plan. But at this point in our process with the official plan update, I think it's fair to say that one of the best in the business anticipates that under a medium to high growth scenario, that 10,500 in the next 25 years is a target for the town of Perth that we should be thinking seriously. The addition of the golf course lands, the addition of the Brownlee lands, recalculating the infill lands, and running them up at a slightly higher density than what we used in 2018. Gets us to 10,500. Your director of planning has identified, based on conversations and inquiries, the potential to go to 11,500. With just all the questions and the inquiries, right? With all. So to cut to the chase, the conclusion of the report is that there is justification today, assuming the population allocation takes place in a formal way, assuming we get the 2024 PPS approved, to designate all of the remaining vacant lands in town to be residential. I say that also with the understanding that once we get these lands developed, there is not a whole lot of direction and ability for the town to grow beyond that. We've got wetland and rivers to our east. We've got wetlands and rivers to our west. We've got wetlands to the north. We've got a lagoon and landfill and industrial park to our south. There's not a lot of room. It's not as if we're standing on the edge of thousands of acres of farm field that we can just jump the road or the fence and start developing. It's a relatively physically contained community in that respect. And so I think it certainly makes planning sense to me to designate those remaining lands now. We let the free market do what the free market does. We've got the capacity to service it. We've got a vibrant, full-service community with high schools, and elementary schools, and hospitals, and places of worship. We've got vibrant commercial, industrial base. And I think it's time that we maybe let go of the reins a little bit and allow development to go on a little bit more aggressively. And hopefully we can do our small bit and address housing crisis. Gary, that's my report. I'm sure there's questions and I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, I'll open the floor for questions. Councilor McCray, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah. My concern is, the baby boomers will, you know, I'm a baby boomer and, I think of, the next 15 to 20 years. And, that whole shift of baby boomers will have gone through the stages of life and then on to death. And what we need to be attracting into Perth are young families. And so that the continuum will continue. And in order to do that, irregardless of all of the development that we're doing, we have to have attractive services. And I'm just concerned that if we use all the properties for residential, will we have the availability for services? Like our pool is utilized, you know, to an incredible extent. And I know weekends are our arena is the same. We don't have enough daycares. We don't have enough staff to manage the daycares. We have an incredible, yes, we have lots of churches, that's without saying. But the young people today, in order to attract them to Perth, we need to have those services. So where in this plan, in the residential area, is there space for expansion on the services that we need to have for young people to attract them to Perth?
That's a great point, and I really do appreciate it. I think that in the introduction of the report, I did make the caveat that I was not going to be speaking commercial industrial. I think it was determined in 2018 that the town of Perth has a good inventory of commercial industrial lands, and that this is very focused on residential. But it goes without saying that a growing community needs more than just houses, right? But again, I think that experience has taught us that if there is a need for daycare, the private sector will step up with the assistance of senior levels of government and provide the types of services that are needed. I think daycare is a key element of that. And there are many growing communities where that is a primary concern. But it does get addressed, and there is land-based, and the way your official plan is written, daycares are permitted in residential areas. And I think that you can ensure that as we go forward, it's not just single semis, towns, and apartments, that it also has the other types of support, community infrastructure that goes along with it. I don't want this to be perceived as saying only residential. I think it would be fair to say that the assumption is built in there that those types of supports would go hand in hand with this proposal.
Councillor Waterfield.
Through the chair to you, Forbes. Could you speak to the authority or lack thereof of council's control on housing types in new residential developments? And could you also address the issue of certification of affordable?
So I think that there is a key element historically in all development proposals for council to play to make sure that what is reflected in your official plan in terms of values, in terms of what is important to the community, gets reflected in new development. I have always said that developers have responsibility for developing a piece of land. Council is responsible for developing a community. I think ensuring that there is an appropriate mix of housing types and densities is a critical aspect of council path. And I think that it's important and you continue to advance that. Affordable housing has been an extremely challenging aspect of new development. I think it's very challenging, if not virtually impossible, to have a community made up of single semis and townhouses to achieve affordable housing in this state. They would have to be very unique development proposals to do that. Most new affordable units are coming in the form of higher density, 4-story apartments, things of that nature. The CMHC right now has very successful programs that promote a percentage of new higher density residential being affordable and affordable for a period of time. And my experience is it's one of the best vehicles for a community to achieve affordable housing is through some of the CMHC programs. I'm personally involved with one in Arnprior right now and another in Kemptville. And they're bringing in single bedroom residential units in the $1,250 a month range. These are real affordable rental units. And I think that it's critical that council keeps putting yourself out there and advancing that and demanding that that be done and that it's not just lip service. And I think too many times we have developers that are just going, yeah, and provide lip service. I think we have to get serious about it. And that is the challenge right there. I think that we're in a period of time where developers, some, are less concerned about community and more concerned about bottom line, and more willing to say for the community, you know, take a hike, we're gonna do what we want to do. And it's not just here, it's across the board. In every community is facing this. And to a point where I would suggest to you that the whole concept of community planning from a new growth standpoint is under siege and under threat. And that the reliance on the bare bones of the PPS is sort of the name of the game.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair.
Can I interrupt for a sec? Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. So I was trying to recognize you there, Mayor Brown, a little while ago, but I thought maybe we lost you. Are you still there?
Just that I have to time when I'm speaking. If Councillor Bolt wouldn't mind.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Mayor Brown. He'll wave the floor to you.
Okay.
Yep, go ahead.
I wanted to make a short statement, before we get too far into this and this whole official plan amendment and things. So what I wanted to say was that unprecedented change is approaching the town and will in the years to follow. The work must be laid for the growth to come. We, this council, will be making the decisions to lay the base for that change. Tonight's meeting is the foundation for the years to come. Please consider this in the discussion to come tonight. And I have two questions. So it says on page 9, there's a need to accommodate an additional 2,055 persons, and it says before that the preference would be given to brownfield and so on. So it leaves totaling all those things. It says that there's 2,055 persons that have to be achieved through existing vacant residential lands. And so my question is, if we've used up all of the land under the previous classifications, where are we going to find an additional land for additional 2,055 people? Like, I don't see many vacant lands around town.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I think if you look at the concluding statements on page 13 and 14 in particular of the report, you'll see that the additional 2,500 people above and beyond the 8,100 can be accommodated with the lands that are designated future development on the Brownlee holdings and the lands that are designated special policy area on the golf course lands. Those two properties combined with infill and intensification opportunities and the existing vacant designated residential lands, I believe have the capacity to accommodate a population to take us to 10,500. So within your existing land base, provided that it moves from these sort of holding designations to being put within the residential designation, should be sufficient to take you to 10,500. And I think in fairness to the community, that's as far as you should go, given the fact that that's the engineered projected limit of lagoon sanitary treatment and Sagger system.
Okay, thank you. Just subsidiary to that, to summarize, you would say that we do the provincial requirement that we have to identify land to expand in 20 years in the future. So we do have that land.
Yes, we do. Mary, you brought up one point, if I may jump on that. One of the other aspects of the 2024 draft PPS is that they encourage municipalities to go beyond the 20-year planning horizon. Pick up. And so if you do that 30-year projection, that takes us out into the 2050, 2055 range. And I'm encouraging you to, let's just designate it all.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, I apologize, Jim, get back too quickly. It says just before that, or just after that, it talks about the previous official plan, and it says that the golf course lands require very high servicing input costs, and it identified it at that time to the cost to be prohibitive to develop. I take it that has changed. If they want to spend the money, then we'll let them go ahead.
I think, Mayor, it would be fair to say that an experienced developer thinks it's doable. I stress that there is a need for a second bridge. I think staff and council have clearly articulated that. I think that there needs to be a sustainable stormwater management solution. We've got two rivers converging at that point with different flooding profiles. And I think stormwater is a challenge. But I think if both of those servicing and infrastructure matters can be dealt with, then it's simply a question of not simply, it becomes a matter more of design and mix and layout and the functionality of how that property gets developed, as opposed to the merits and the principles of whether it should or should not be developed. I think that the question of how becomes a big focus that you need to talk about.
Okay, Paul, I'll let you ask your question.
Well, it's part of a statement or a comment and then a question and observation, and that's to say that I think Forbes, you're spot on in the sense that yes, we have to look down that 30-year corridor. Excuse me, I can get cold here. And we have to recognize and realize that change is coming upon us. I think we all agree to that. But to your point about we're going through unprecedented times since COVID is an understatement. My concerns going forward is that while I agree with you in stating that we as a council have to be aggressive insofar as suggesting policy that's going to accommodate affordability going forward, it is truly a global push that has to make that happen. When I say that, I mean, provincially, certainly federally. I mean, it's the elephant in the room. It's the big talk about every day. But we talked many times about defined affordability. So to Councilor McCrae's point about bringing in younger people, let's face it, for the most part, has become a retirement community over the last few years. But I feel that that's going to change. And I think that as long as we can attract youth into our community going forward, that'll change that landscape. But the elephant in the room, as we all know, is the affordability part. And in order for younger people with young families to afford housing, they have to have either extremely high-paying jobs or a combination of high-paying jobs and houses that are more affordable. Simply put. So, I mean, I've lived through in my lifetime probably working lifetime, many government programs, because I was a mortgage guy for most of my working years, and I lived through the provincial and federal programs. Home ownership made easy, was one of them, AHOP, assisted home ownership, programs where governments, try to help people with down payments and soften the rules for eligibility and so on. But when we tie in the high cost of housing into that we're experiencing right now, I'm having a hard time even fathoming how all of this is going to come together. All of that said, I think, and my main concern as a politician, as a municipal politician, is to hold higher levels of government, provincial and federal levels of government, hold them accountable for more vision and the ability to make housing more affordable. And I'm not just saying about for people that like Isabel and I that are literally going to be going through double rent increases at this time of their lives in the most the near future, but also for anyone, be it retirees, be it young people looking to afford to buy their own home. I think we need a rethink and a reset, and I don't know what the answer is, but in closing, I think we're all in this together at all levels of government, and I would be remiss by saying it can't all just fall on the shoulders of the local councils.
Councillor Burton.
Yes, thank you to the chair. I want to thank my colleagues for asking so many questions that I don't now have to ask. Appreciate it. And Forbes in particular for you dealing with the issue of density versus sprawl. I mean, I had a panic moment there where I might be moving into a world where both happened. And I thank you for explaining the geographic nature of the town of Perth so clearly. Given that we are managing change, more so now as a part of our job as councillors, than it used to be primarily providing services for the population that exists. Now a major part of our job is also managing change and trying to ensure that we have some input in that change as opposed to that having it done to us. As that change happens, and if tomorrow or today we say go ahead and open up these lands, at what point in the official plan process do we start discussing what that means for the provision of services beyond what Councillor McRae has already mentioned, like the obvious increase in the cost of policing by virtue of populations? Does the nature of our fire service change? The number of personnel we have to employ because we're already covering our road clearance and snow clearance. I think you'll understand from the presentation we gave with bare bones the least number of staff we can. At what point does that become part of the official plan or doesn't it? And then where do we deal with that? Do we just respond as it happens? Or do we try and project what that's going to cost?
I think that's a critical question. I think it's council's job to create an environment where investment happens. You're not building houses. You're not a developer. You're not investing in new commercial or industrial development. It's others that are doing that. And you need to create an environment that identifies need and provides a pathway for those that do invest and do make those things happen to come to the community. And part of that is tone of the official plan. And I think it would be fair to say that the tone of the current official plan is a bit stodgy, right? That it's not really progressive in terms of encouraging growth and development. It's more of a status quo type of official plan. I think that I did make the statement earlier at the issues and options report states that I think this should be the last update of an official plan that you have. And that over the next 5 years, you start working towards a new official plan that has maybe from its get-go, a different tone, a different focus, and a different sort of feel that is more progressive and more towards addressing future needs of the community. I do think that there is a role in the current process to pick up on elements of that we make sure that the pieces of the puzzle are all clearly identified in policy. The other thing I think, Councillor, is important is to realize that takes money. It takes investment. And the best tool that you have to be able to invest in growth-related costs are development charges. You're allowed to charge them. You have to justify the expense, but that is designed as a tool to address the incremental cost of growth on a community, whether it's emergency services or recreation or basic infrastructure components. The development charges is not a tax, it's a user paid. If you don't have development charges, it becomes a tax on the community to cover those costs. And so having well thought out, up-to-date development charges that can be justified provides you with the financial means to address some of the big ticket items that come with growth. It is two sides of the ledger. Money coming in, but money going. And your job of providing services, you have that tool and you should take advantage of it to the fullest extent. But it's a combination of looking after the money and also creating an environment in your policy that is encouraging the types of investment that you want to see.
I appreciate that response because my concern is that if we wait for the taxes to come in from the new residents and then respond to increases in costs and needs for services that may be too late.
You're always playing catch up there. You are. And that's why I think development charges and having healthy reserves in development charges and investing them wisely is a critical component of a growing community. I can tell you as a fact that the highest development charges that are required from municipalities in Eastern Ontario are in the communities that are growing the fastest. They have the highest development charges. They know that if they don't get that money, they're in trouble because the taxes do not cover it.
Appreciate it.
Councillor Smith, do you have any questions?
We can't hear.
Sorry, Barry, just wait, we're gonna unmute you, Barry.
Oh, he's gotta do it.
Sorry about that. No, I don't have any questions. It's been really interesting hearing all the points and questions from other people. Great report, Forbes. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor McCrae, you were first there.
So I guess where I'm having a hard time understanding is, we have a responsibility as councillors to develop responsibly and incrementally. But then on the other hand, we have developers pounding on the door And we have things from the province like cutting red tape to build more homes. And where do you find the balance in all of that? You know, if we don't speak up as municipalities and represent our constituents, and you talk about that sense of community. If we don't stand up for ourselves, because the province sure isn't, in terms of some of the policies that are coming through, like cutting red tape to build more homes. They say it'll build a stronger economy, keep the costs low, time and services delivery, all that kind of thing. If we don't hold the reins, who in the heck's going to? And yes, our community wants to be progressive. I'm all for, being progressive and developing and that kind of thing, but where do you find the happy medium? Or safety?
I think that, Councillor, you're not alone in asking that question. You're not alone in finding the current environment challenging. I couldn't have predicted that we would be in an environment today where there is no such thing as third-party appeals on elected official decisions on pilot in Ontario. And that's what we're finding ourselves in. I think that balance is not something that you look at a specific point in time, but something that you try to achieve over a period of time. There have been points in time in our history where balance did not exist in efforts to address specific challenges that we face as a society. After the Second World War, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of new residential lands opened up to house the people coming home and the baby boom that happened. And we have a legacy in this community of wartime houses that are in certain parts of our community. And at that point in time, there wasn't balance. It was, we bloody well have to build these houses and we have to get on them. And so I would suggest to you that we don't have the luxury of having balance and incremental growth today in our need to respond to the housing crisis. And we've got the federal government investing billions of dollars. We have the provincial government taking that money from the federal government and giving it to the municipalities to achieve growth and development. I don't think it's realistic to expect that we can achieve that incremental, balanced, steady as you go growth today that we've experienced in the past. And I think that that's a social reality that is staring us right in the face.
Councillor Bolt.
I'd just like to not rebut, but make a comment about your comment, Forbes, about collecting development charges and the communities that charge the more, the biggest development charges are the ones that are growing the fastest. And while I get some of that, I also, the other side of me says, well, if I'm a developer, I've got to look at what it's going to cost for me to develop my subdivision. And I've got to look at all of my costs and say, all right, at the end of the day, it's going to cost me X number of dollars to build this subdivision. What do I expect in return for my investment? So when you say that it's important that we charge as much as we can in development charges, I look at that and say, well, you know what? If the developer is going to add that amount of money to the cost of building this home or this subdivision, ultimately it's going to be, as you put it, the end user is going to pay for that. So that challenges my thinking into say, if the end user can't afford to pay more than a certain amount of money, I don't see, as much as I like what you're saying, I think we have to be careful and we have to make sure that at the end of the day, people can afford the housing. And the one thing that you just mentioned was after the war. But we gotta look at the fact that there was a lot of different economies of scale after the war to put forward the housing movement. And when we looked at the income of the average worker after the war, even in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, the income of the average worker versus the output and interest rates and the cost of buying housing was a lot different than it is now. And the one thing that concerns me is it's great to see a lot of young people coming to our community. But how do you get them? You've got to have jobs. And that's the other side of that. Anyway, I digress. I just wanted to make that comment because I felt it was it's something I'd like your comeback on.
Well, Councillor Paul, it wouldn't be a surprise to you that I have a slightly different opinion on this matter. We've talked about this for years now on development charges. One of the things I think that is important to appreciate is that in the province of Ontario now, legitimate affordable housing projects do not get charged development charges. We are not allowed to charge development charges on legitimate affordable housing projects. So I'm talking about a single detached house that goes on the market at $699, right? Which would be a new house that's being built in Burnaby. The development charges would be the same budget as the lights and the kitchen faucets in that house. It is an extremely nominal component of the overall capital investment in a new house. It is a very, very small number. The other thing about development charges is that it's paid and built into the overall total package that is amortized over a 20 to 30 year period in terms of payment. It can be absorbed on a monthly payment and show up as being pennies. So I think that your point is well taken, but I don't think that it matches up with the reality of the huge cost of building new houses at $400 a square foot today. And that development just historically was a higher percentage of the overall capital investment than it is today. It's a much smaller percentage of the overall capital than it once was. And there is no developer that I have ever encountered that says I'm not going to invest in the community because of development charges. There's lots of other elements that they look at in a community and say, I'm not going to invest in that community, but it's not because of development charges. And I would actually suggest to you that I've been told by 2 or 3 very experienced developers, if they have a healthy development charge, that's a community I want to invest in because that's a community that knows what its fiscal responsibilities are going to be. And I think that we've talked about a youth a fair bit. Perth hasn't had the same attraction to the youth historically as it has today because we were a long commute, right, into where the jobs were. That community was changed now with remote work. We're seeing our communities get younger. You can walk down the main street and see the community younger. You've got a whole new generation of people that are investing on your main street. My suit that I'm buying for my daughter's wedding this fall is from a young entrepreneur on the street. And I think that we're starting to see younger people coming back into our community because of those COVID and remote work changes. But I think your fundamental point, Councillor, is that we have to make sure that they have an affordable place that they can live, is the overriding responsibility that this council has.
Councillor Wonderful.
Through the chair to boards, as a supplementary to my previous question, and just building on this conversation, brief statement and then a question. I've always felt that for us to build our community, it's essential we have diversity of housing styles to reflect a diversity of lifestyles and to reflect a diversity of price points in which people can live. That diversity only strengthens our community and help us grow with the vision we want as per. That being said, when we are working with the developer and this developer says, well, I'm going to be building single family homes and X number of condo buildings, then we say, okay, that's great, but we want townhomes in there as well. And we want lower priced townhomes. And the response is, we don't do that. From an authority point of view, do we have any authority to say, well, if you want to build in our community, you have to build more diversity in terms of housing style? You use terms like getting out there and assuring earlier, but what's the authority line there in terms of us having control over the growth of our community and really working with developers, saying, no, if you want to build here, we need to have a diversity of housing stock for the reasons that I've stated. I appreciate your insight and comments.
Negotiating with developers has always been a challenging job. And it's been one that I've spent my entire 40-year career doing. Some, it's relatively straightforward and easy. Others look at you and tell you very clearly that that's not what we're going to do. I think that there has to be clear direction to staff to make sure that they put certain points with the developer. I think that council needs to come up with lines in the sand where you're not going to support development that doesn't, as a bare minimum, achieve X, Y, and Z. That doesn't mean that you're going to be successful. It doesn't mean that you're going to achieve your end goals, but you're trying. As opposed to being passive and just let things happen, you're trying to push your agenda. And sometimes you have to be prepared to have somebody walk and not invest in your community. And other times they're just going to take their ball and remove it from the local arena and go to a higher authority and advance their case there. And then you have to fight your case at that higher arena. But I think unless you have a plan, unless you have a clearly articulated, unless you're prepared to defend that plan, you don't have hope of having any success whatsoever. But if you do have a plan and you defend the plan and you advance the plan, there is a chance that you may be successful from time to time. And you're going to have wins and you're going to have losses. But I do think that you have to keep pushing that. And it's really, really hard work. But if you don't push it, and you just have things happen to you, and then you lose all. Did that answer your question, sort of?
May I have a quick supplementary? So you keep talking about having a plan. So you're talking about the official plan. What are you trying to be specific?
I think it comes down to more than a official plan. I think that there needs to be in the official plan, in an appendage document, in a separate strategic document, that there is clear direction as to what you want to achieve and what are the very bare minimums. And that needs to be articulated to staff. And that can be reflected in the annual budget. That can be reflected in annual work plans within the various departments. It can be reflected in more strategic documents, right, than an official plan. But I think it's a combination of all of your tools saying the same message, advancing the same ideas and themes and values that you want to make sure that everybody that's doing new investment in your community is aware of. And you advance to them that you expect them to at least address some of the basics.
Thank you.
Mayor Brown.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to mention about development charges. If you don't have development charges, then you have the people in Perthmore paying for the roads in the golf course. Development pays for development. My other point was this report is the foundation, the playing field that we're starting with. We need to base all our decisions in the upcoming 2.5 years, because many of our decisions will be based on where the town goes. We have to keep that in mind. We're making plans for the town as it's going to be in 2026. So, you know, this is a historical time in the town of Perth, and we have to keep that in mind. Keep looking to the future, because if we don't, we're going to end up in a mishmash.
Okay, we have a pretty good discussion, Councilor McCray.
So I think that Councillor Gary Waterfield like really hit the nail on the head in regards to, you know, the official plan and then what actually, like, it's the foundation, and then there's the next plan or the appendix that Forbes referred to. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe our CAO or our legislative clerk can straighten me out on this. Then you have your policies and your procedures, and they all have to, all your ducks have to line up. I think the piece that we're missing with the whole development part is that appendix part. And that we really, like, the points that you brought up, Councilor Waterfield, in regards to, you know, we want to ensure that we have a diversified form of development, that we're looking at different and diversified economic group of people, age groups, and all of those various things. So those are things that need to be put in that appendix, and I'm sure there are other things that we need to line up and put in there as soon as possible, because we're having this insurgent of development happening, and we're kind of behind the eight ball here. So I just want to know what people's thoughts on that is, or how do you get all those systems in place? It seems to me like we need to do that.
If I may, I'd like to suggest to you that we look at the basis of the official plan. The very beginning of the official plan has a series of statements that are typically grounded in community values, and that we may look to that basis as an area that we supplement through the update and add or delete or do what we feel is necessary to that basis in terms of setting that context of what are the main themes, what are the critical components that are driving this plan and this community forward. And as opposed to appendices, and I'm not fundamentally opposed to them, but if you're at the back of the document, you're less likely to get attention than if you're at the front of the document. And I would suggest that.
That's what he's-
No, I appreciate you building on my comments and,
For the next one.
I think that the basis of the plan is where we could maybe do more work than what
It's just a.
I think was originally envisioned
Just over
to.
the next 2 years, we can sort of start.
Well, yeah, prepping for the
Yeah,
complete redo.
that's great. Council, okay, those are good comments and Councilor Waterfield. So I was just speaking to the CEO and we have to think about, this is the starting point going forward for us. This is an update to our current official plan. And really over the next 2 years or so, 3 years, we really got to get our ducks in order for the next new official plan. So I'm just wondering if everybody's happy and had your concerns or questions answered tonight, but on a go forward basis, I think we have a lot of discussion too. I was just speaking to see over the next couple of years as to where we want to go in the future. Because we're not going to have the answers tonight. It's a huge plan to move forward. Forbes has given us the starting point, what to think about. But I want to make sure everybody here has had their questions answered. If you have any other comments you'd like to make before Councilor Waterfield moves the motion. And sorry, Mayor Brown, you have your question, your hand up, or do you have another question or comment?
I have a question. I have my hand up.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm thinking, Councilor McCray asked, how do we make this happen? How do we get things put in place? And I think the answer is you hire good staff, which we've already done, and then you give them appropriate instructions as to what you want done and which way do you go?
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, Councilor Waterfield, you have a motion?
As recommended by the committee of the whole, be it resolved that the council of the town of Perth receive for information the residential lands comprehensive review 2024 official plan update by JP2G Consultants Incorporated dated June 4th, 2024 and presented by Forbes Simon at the committee of the whole meeting on June the 11th, 2024.
Discussion on the motion. Just from a staff point of view, what's the next steps for us as a council here? Where do we go
That'd
from
be a
here?
great question for Connor
So
or Joanna.
I don't want to put our director on the spot, Joanna, but do you have some comments about going forward with this over the next few months? Knowing your workload.
Yeah, it's gonna be a pretty hefty workload. But I think Forbes and I are pretty good to work in tandem, going over various things side by side, discussing everything, so I think we'll be able to make some time, because this is a really critical, important piece, and this is something that I think we've needed to get done for a very long time. Since prior to me getting here, so I'd like to put this as a priority.
Okay, Forbes.
So, in the official plan update project, the next deliverable is for me to provide you with a red line draft of what I'm recommending our policy changes. Right? That's the next deliverable, and that should be happening by sort of early fall, beginning of Q3. And so that's something that Joanna and I talk about a lot and we'll continue to talk a lot about it. And this report will be built into that as an assumption, and we would be designating lands and coming up with policies that we hope will serve the town well over the next 5 years. And so we are coming forward with that later this year. And that's where you're going to be able to have an opportunity to wordsmith and tweak and add and subtract things that we're saying should happen in terms of changes to your official plan. And a lot of it will be based on the discussion we had on the issues and options.
Okay, Councilor Waterfield, you can hand it first.
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify, the House is not sitting till October, and that does not necessarily mean at the time the new provincial policy statement passed. That could even go to 2025. And the new draft of the official plan has to reflect the 2024 or 25 policy statement. So it's kind of a moving target, is it not?
There is a moving target, but I think that, planners are getting used to the sand shifting under their feet these days. I do think that there's a local context that we should be reflective of, and that is the county's growth plan. And that growth plan is talking about soft caps and not hard caps, which is very, very different than 2018. And we have a new manager of planning at the county who's very experienced, very knowledgeable. Hopefully we'll be working at updating the county official plan. And I think Joanna and I would agree that his tone is more consistent with the direction that we're getting out of the 2024. And I think that that's going to be important, that we have somebody at the county that sees the value of service urban complete communities growing. And I think we have that. So we're gonna have to play a bit of a dance as we go forward, Gary, but I think we're on relatively solid ground. It's not quicksand anyway.
Councilor McCray, did you have a question or comment on the motion?
No, I just want to make sure that in this plan that's going to come forward, we have these values that are so important to us, and I'm hoping there would be some kind of maybe a workshop we could look at. So what is this council's values moving forward towards future development in Perth, and so that we can ensure that we're all on the same page in regards to that, and that our development department can move forward with that as developments come through the queue.
Final comment?
Yeah, I would suggest to you, Councillor, that that's more an approach that you would take with a new official plan, as opposed to tweaking and updating an existing official plan. The idea of visioning and workshops and broad community consultation is more consistent with a new official plan. I think that what I would encourage council to do is look at the basis of the official plan at the beginning of the document. Get comfortable, get familiar with it, and if you find that that basis is missing some of those components that you feel it should reflect, let me know through Joanna. Okay? And I think that that would be the best way to sort of get on with this, get the update, let's put the new Band-Aid on, and then start setting the stage for a new official plan 5 years down the road.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I do hope that Councilor McCray and Councilor Waterfield's comments are looked very seriously at this round to start with. Okay, if there's no further discussion on the motion, all in favor?
I have my hand up, Deputy Mayor,
Oh, go ahead, Mayor Brown.
and would like to thank Ford very much for his report. It was very helpful, very detailed, summarized things very well, and we sort of had the lay of the land. Secondly, the idea behind designating land is not only so we know what is there, but it also helps the developer, like they don't have to go through an official plan amendment.
Okay, thank you. So again, if there's no further questions or comments, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion? Carried unanimously. Thanks. So I think that's it. Our next meeting, regular COW meeting, is Tuesday, August 6th at 5:30 p.m. and can have Councilor McCray move to adjourn.
that the committee of the whole meeting held on June the 11th, 2024. Be adjourned at 6:59.
Okay, just before that, sorry, if there's any media online, any questions from the media, sorry. Not hearing that? Okay, we're adjourned.